Yes, welcome to the No Stay Project here live from the fortified compound in Mesa, Arizona for December 30th, 2017, the last live edition of the No Stay Project for 2017. It is on its way out. I know last year we kind of figured that we're... Could it get worse than 2016? Well, yeah, in many ways it actually did. And we can also get you into the No Stay Project Skype chat, which is on the board for discussion for this here show. Because, what did they say? The squeaky wheel gets the grease or gets the airtime? Time to revamp things on the chat. So that's one of the things we're going to be talking about. And one thing I want to point out that... if somebody's on the chat, which is primarily for helping people get through the court process, okay? If there's somebody in there that's actually railing against me and what we do here on the show, it's probably a good bet that they are a troll and will have to be kick banned. So always let me know and I will take care of that. I'm going to do the best I can to be more involved with that there chat. And, and my website, which was down. No, I was not attacked. That's the benefit of having the G up in the background. You don't get those attacks. Well, some people actually believe that. But no, I wasn't attacked. It was simply, there was a glitch, and my website was having an effect on other websites. I think it had to do with the fact that I have so much, I'm so far over my limit. I was wrong on the chat, guys. I am 16 gigs over my limit, and that was causing a drain on the server, so that is being taken care of. So I'll talk about that more later, but suffice it to say, I will be deleting the hellaciously high bitrate podcast. I'm going to be keeping the lower quality MP3, which is just fine, and I will still, of course, be putting the show up there on YouTube. So don't be alarmed if you're going back to some of the older, let's say starting off 3 months ago, when we don't have that really, really high quality uncompressed WAV file. It's got to go. Got to go. It's just too large a file. I don't know, most people don't download it anyway. They get the lower quality one, which sounds almost as good. So, because it's the content. And that's what we got over here. So without further ado over here, I want to bring back my guest. He's been on the show before. He's actually is a video of the show that we did on, what is it? It was in New Hampshire when I first met him, in person anyway. And so yeah, if you go to Calvin's YouTube channel, Calvin DeWitt, you can see that in brilliant HD. So welcome back to the show, Alex Knight III.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, it's great to be back. I don't know how long it's been since I've been on the show. I know the video that you're referencing, that was 7 years ago, or 7.5 years ago, because it was in the summer back in 2010 at Porkfest up in Lancaster, New Hampshire. And I think the last time I was here on the show, audio-wise, was oh boy, it's got to be a few years now, actually, believe it or not.
Well, we always say it. We have to make sure that doesn't happen again. It's got to be a regular thing.
Absolutely, sure. I'm game for that. That's fine. Yeah, I think it's actually been probably something like 5 years or something. So that's 5 years too long.
I don't know if it's been that long, but I know you had you did have at the time you had one of your books you would put out.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, okay, if this is 2017, yeah, well, it'd be probably about 4 years ago then.
Damn.
Because that would have been because I don't think I've been on since I've published a couple of novels, and I'm working on a third, and there's been a lot of other projects and things, of course, that I've published over the course of time. So, yeah, I think that was Tales from Dark 7, which was my first collection of short stories, and that would have been in 2013. So, yeah, that would have been probably just before I moved to my house here. I have a new house here, which I don't think I was in at the last time we talked on this show. So, yeah, about 4 years. So it's been a while.
Yeah, I know you seem well. See, I've never backed away from giving what I honestly think of Facebook. I know there are some things that it's good for, but as far as intelligent dialogue, I know you're more active on it than I am. You have to have the same experience, maybe not as bad as what I've experienced, because I've made it a point not to post anymore, responses. But have you any experience, at least even with the voluntarist group, where you can actually have an honest discourse on actual ideas instead of just a headbutting contest?
Well, I've experienced both, but I know exactly what you mean. I have a block list that's at this point that's probably about as long as my friends list, and probably about half of the people on there, well, maybe not that much, but a good percentage of them are voluntarists. So it's discouraging and encouraging, I think, in the same breath, because on the one hand, it is very discouraging that those of us that at least ostensibly share this philosophy of voluntarism and this desire to live in a free and stateless society, in a non-coercive society, have to be at loggerheads personality-wise so much. There seems to be a lot of attitudes and personality conflicts out there, and I'm sure that I'm guilty of a few of them myself. I'm not exonerating myself 100% for always being in the best mood or always being the most agreeable. However, if we can try to look beyond that, I think what it is also evidence of are just the greater and the larger number of people that are coming into this movement. When it gets to a point where it's not just your small circle of voluntarist friends that you almost never argue with, and you've got complete strangers that seem to be up to speed on a lot of this, except they just have these odious personalities and they're extremely argumentative. Well, I guess in a certain respect you can call that progress.
Yeah, I noticed that if this is my experience, of course, that if I was to stray away from the just basically cheerleading anarchism or voluntarism, that do no harm, non-aggression, when I move into other areas, and I've mentioned this recently, when I talk about veganism or abortion, all of a sudden, people, and this is, you may have gone through similar things with other subjects, why you have such a long block list. It just seems that people who seem to be able to have a rational discourse based on principles and not employing logical fallacies and whatnot are completely incapable of discussing these two subjects with me. That's my experience. So, there are other. Well, what I'm getting to is there are other hot button issues that would cause people that that you'd have to block them or that you can't have a rational discussion with, besides the veganism or abortion.
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, you've got the whole bordertarian, clique, who are all in favor of voluntarism, except when it comes to, national borders, and somehow they think that's, it's okay to have those, so that we don't increase the size of the welfare state and, allow people in from different cultures that have different idea systems and things. So that's another one you can add to the list. There are any number of contentious subjects, and again, when you couple that with the widely disparate range of personalities involved, there's just a lot of conflict, and it's I can only hope that the statists experience as much or more conflict than we do in the voluntarist movement, because it does seem to be rather abundant. On the other hand...
Well, hold on just a second. We're up against the break, so just hold tight. If you are under attack by a bureaucrat, you want to learn a proven, replicated on 4-continent method of effectively defending yourselves, then go to markstevens.net, get government indicted, listen to the podcast of this year's show. And we feel welcome to call in, because that's one of the main things we do here on The Big Show, is to help people through the process so that we can get more success stories. Really, even if we're not getting all the success stories, I like to have 100%, of course, but we're empowering people to be able to stand up for themselves, which has a lot of merit to it. as my guest, of course, a friend, Alex Knight III, I'm sure you would agree that giving people the tools necessary for them to stand up to these people is a value in and of itself.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's precious little of that, as a matter of fact, out there in libertarian quarters, especially in terms of things that are effective. Mostly it's just, theory and things of that nature, which is fine. We need to have the academics, behind our philosophy, and to have it fleshed out in terms of how a free and a voluntary society works. But you also need the nuts and bolts of how to, bring it into practical reality, and that's something you do on the show.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people stand up to these bullies, a lot of success, and we've had a lot of situations where people got a smoking deal and just didn't think that they would be able to do any better in front of this black robe tyrant. And hey, sometimes that's that's the thing to do. Not everyone is an activist. I'll talk about this later. Yeah, we haven't had the best track record as far as activism on the show. So hopefully we'll be able to do more of that in the coming year. I want to get back to this. See, I mentioned on a recent broadcast that I am in the trifecta of hate, in that I'm an anarchist, I'm against abortion for principle, not religious reasons or political reasons, and I'm a vegan, of course, for ethical reasons and a principle, being consistent with anarchy. And in the hate that gets thrown down on you. But you mentioned one, I don't know if I've seen quite as much hate, but man, there's some mudslinging going in what you mentioned before about the whole thing about borders. That is holy crap. I mean, you've got both sides where you've got self-proclaimed anarchist all throwing out, saying that the other side, the other guy's retarded. Oh no, he's a retard. Oh, he's a border tard.
Yeah, it is discouraging. I mean, the infighting, and you wish that, there was just some way to kind of put a cap on it all, because that's what we want to see the status doing. We want to see the status, infighting and breaking down and dissipating, instead of our own movement, which is, still very nascent and just kind of, really beginning to build up a good head of steam in terms of, being a serious challenge to the status quo. And yet you have these kinds of issues arise, and it really is a shame. But again, I'm not standing here pointing fingers exactly, because I'm sure that I've probably been guilty of it, a few times, over the course of time. We all do it. We get into those emotional moments, and we're very passionate about what we believe in here. And there are some areas where there's just, where there's dispute. But I think really, if I could offer some encouraging words, let's focus on the areas where there is not really much room for dispute. I mean, I think we all agree, that I don't mean to speak collectively, but I think it's probably not that controversial that, for example, taxation is theft, and the drug war needs to go away, and that there should not be restrictions on gun rights and self-defense and things of that nature. Let's focus on those things, and let's let the other things work themselves out in the marketplace once we get to a position where government is on the run and beginning to collapse and diminish.
I certainly would like to see that. It's what's unfortunate is that both sides of this border think that they are taking the principled anarchist stand that taxation is theft, and that the idea is to, again, I don't want to name any names. I'd rather stick to the principles. Mm-hmm. It's supposed those who defend a strong border claim that it's still consistent with anarchist principles of do no harm and the non-aggression principle, because just letting anybody cross that line, imaginary or otherwise, just letting anyone do that, what they're doing is, I always hear it put in these terms. And let's not say that not every bordertarian is doing, but this seems to be the loudest ones, in that the people that are coming over are not bringing libertarian or voluntarist principles with them. They're bringing big daddy government liberalism with them. They're libtards, in other words. And that the idea is that politically liberal ideology is so friggin' dangerous. It is so absolutely destructive, and that it is more of an evil than the government securing the border. So it's like an ethical dilemma to them, where it's less of an ethical issue to allow the government to use force to keep those people out than to let them in so that they can rain horror and bloodshed on society by voting for Democrats. Right?
Yeah, that seems to be the argument in a nutshell. Absolutely.
Okay, so I've seen enough on Facebook and other websites that I think that's fairly accurate. That it's, and I've mentioned on the show before that it's this idea that the Muslims, that they're Muslims are leftist. You know, they're libtards and they want big government and they're only coming here for they only come to Western nations to get the free stuff, and that you can't have a welfare state and an unsecure border at the same time, because they will absolutely destroy your society. The Muslims and the brown people, the libtards, are going to destroy. They are that dangerous and they are that big a threat to society.
So then what is the argument that's put forth is we need strong borders while we work to get rid of the welfare state, and once the welfare state is gone, and only then can we then open up the borders. I first of all, I guess something that I would advance to try, if it could kind of, assuage the fears of people who are thinking along those lines. If you look at it, what is the foundational, most basic characteristic of a nation state? It's the borders. It's the arbitrary geographical boundaries that constitute this area in which political bullyism takes place.
Well, we have to go to a break, though, Alex. I'm sorry. I'm glad to be back live from the fortified compound in Mesa, Arizona, talking with a friend of mine, Alex Knight III, for this December 30th, 2017 edition of the No State Project. Welcome back, my friend. We were talking about before the break. We were talking about borders, of course, and the conflicting arguments or ideas that even anarchists have, that it's split. And so you were talking about the fundamental nature of the nation state being defined by a border, correct?
Correct. And so I think the worries of those that worry about, well, geez, we've got too many people in here that want to take advantage of a welfare state. Well, if someday in the midst of time, if we're able to do away with this terrible idea known as the state, I think that the de-evolution of that construct, of that, well, concept and construct, institution, if you will, is naturally going to progress in a direction where, the border is going to be literally just about the last thing to go, no matter what, because that's the fundamental defining characteristic of it. Your welfare state is going to go much faster anyway than the borders will. So I think that, their fears are largely kind of unfounded, and they're getting kind of all worked up about nothing, if in fact their goal is the ultimate dissolution of the state.
Well, it's obvious that an area can be overwhelmed to service, so let's say even in a voluntary society, you can still have a community. Let's say, we'll use Mesa, Arizona as an example, especially since it's 70 degrees right now. Okay?
Go ahead, rub it in.
Oh, man. That's what she said. So, can never resist that. So let's say you have Mesa, Arizona in the future. It's a voluntary society, and the services of sanitation, water, electricity, the streets, this is all done privately or collectively to a small degree. Let's say we have certain common areas, okay, but generally it's all done by the market. And there's no prison system. You could have a situation where so many people could come into the area in such a short period of time as to really put a strain on services. I mean, it is possible. Will it lead to a complete collapse of your society? I don't see that, But the thing that really gets me here, even though there are legitimate concerns about having tens and tens of thousands of people flooding into an area, there are legitimate concerns there. I just see the argument as being the same as people have for voting. That, because you could say, look, libtard politicians and their retarded followers are so effing dangerous. We have to vote to make sure that they don't get in. We have to. I mean, wasn't that the reason why they were saying that an accused pedophile or child molester had to be voted in Alabama? Because liberals are so dangerous. I mean, isn't it the same argument that they have for border security, so-called border security, as it is for voting?
Yeah, I mean that's a good analogy. That's certainly a good analogy in the scenario, the hypothetical scenario you just outlined, though. The first thing that came to my mind is if we were talking about a privatized voluntary society. Number one, a lot of the incentive for so many people flooding into it is in most cases typically removed. And number two, since in a free society there really is no such thing as public property, although there are a small handful of voluntarists who have talked about certain forms of privately owned public property, but even then that's kind of a different animal than what we have today. You don't have people flooding into private property because unless they're welcomed onto the premises by the owners, whether it's a business or a private residence or something of that nature, they're trespassing, and then they're going to be asked to leave, and if they don't, then it's legitimate to use force to remove them. So I think that all the fears about people flooding in only exist in kind of a governmentalized public property, public access to so-called public services, tax-financed services. That's the only place where the danger really lies. And again, I don't think that a boundary around a society that even possesses fragments or elements of that, as governmental services move towards privatization and as government begins to dissolve and collapse, I don't think those boundaries or borders are going to go away. Either in terms of enforcement or in terms of just the ideas that are inside people's minds sooner than a welfare state is going to go away. So I think the fears are really just not understanding the linear what is in my mind anyway 99% or more likely to be the linear process that the dissolution of a state follows as it moves and transitions towards liberty.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, but I'm going to have to go ahead and disagree with some of it. And what I disagree, and what I'm disagreeing, because you mentioned at the beginning that a lot of the incentive would be removed when you have a voluntary society as opposed to what we have now. And I think it's the actual opposite. I think when you have something where you do have a voluntary society, and there is no government in place, and people accept that it is wrong to do harm, even if you call yourself some exalted title. I think what you're going to do is similar to what look. You're going to have a mass migration. You could potentially have a mass migration, peaceful, that could really wreak havoc on the area, not necessarily on services, but you could have what's happening in Arizona, in Phoenix area right now. And I'm not saying it's the collapse of society, but there's an incentive to come here. You've got incredibly high taxes and regulations in California that have been driving people into the Phoenix area for years. And I speak from personal experience. It has made a friggin' mess of the housing market here in the Valley. When you have the largest growing, it's an area in North America, and it's centered right here in my backyard. Because what happens is, you are driving up the cost of everything in the area. One of the main reasons why you're moving to Mesa and moving to Phoenix from Southern California is to get away from such an unbelievably high cost of living. It should not cost $4.50 for a loaf of bread. That's disgraceful. So it should not be $3.55 a gallon for gas right now in 2017. It's not 2009 anymore. Those days were supposed to pass. So, you are going to have problems, because I know for myself, Alex, moving when I did, it was horrible, because you start this damn feeding frenzy. People are so desperate to move here that they're making bids at $10,000 above asking price. I don't have to tell you or anybody with any education economics at all that will wreak havoc in the long run on the market. Yeah, it's getting a couple of rich scumbags who commoditize every damn thing, and everything is you got to get the last dime out of every single transaction. But it drives the cost of everything through the roof, which is what is happening. Welcome back, Alex. And I just want to bring you back. And I know I went on a little rant there because it's so close to home. No pun intended, I guess. It's that. Let me ask you this question, because I think it settles the whole incentive thing, if anyone is disagreeing here. Because you live in Vermont, correct?
Uh-huh.
Now, let's just say that the Free State Project actually accomplishes what it wants to do and there is no more government.
In New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire. Wouldn't that be a pretty big incentive for people like you to uproot and move?
Absolutely. Sure it would. And you had raised a point in your example before the break that I had not thought of, but here's the thing, I would think that in a situation such as the one that you just outlined, it would mainly consist upon people who already have something looking to improve their situation. Now, you might have a few forward-thinking, industrious, principled individuals who say, yeah, I'm sick and tired of this government thing, and I don't have two nickels to rub together, but guess what? There's a lot of jobs over there, and there's a lot more economic opportunity. But you're still going to have a certain contingent of people who either for ideological reasons or just out of, uncertainty or ignorance or just out of a knee-jerk reaction, out of conditioning, want to stay with or gravitate towards where the freebies and the handouts are. So I think it kind of, the idea of mass migration like this does, I think, kind of divide into two camps. And it's simply a question of, which one is greater in any given situation, in any given geographical area at any given time. And until there's more or less a kind of unilateral situation where there's either just total Leviathan, North Korea style, police state, or freedom, when we have this kind of weird situation like we have in the legal fiction known as the United States of America today, where you have pockets of freedom mixed with pockets of socialism and fascism and other forms of government intervention and tyranny, what you have is just this kind of, crazy quilt amalgam of areas where you have people, flooding in looking for government handouts, and then areas where you have people leaving those places and moving to places where there's a little more freedom and lower taxes and lower cost of living and so on and such. So, I don't off the top of my head obviously have any kind of statistical, facts or figures to throw around to say which is greater and which is bigger and where these things are happening specifically versus other places. But that to my mind would be kind of a general overview of the phenomenon. And again, you raise a very good point on the flip side of that coin.
Yeah, the issues aren't, they're not black and white. We can't paint with a brush like a lot of people do to support the argument that the refugees and the immigrants, that they're all bringing the ideology of big government with them. I mean, you're making quite a gross assumption by doing that. True. And the idea that, look, the reason why people, and I know people who have done this, The reason why so many people flee from California and come to Arizona is not from Southern California is not because of the weather, because they have similar weather patterns in let's say San Bernardino. They're not coming here or fleeing because they want more government. They're coming here because they want less. They want a lower, they want to have the same standard of living, but not have to pay quite as much for it. So the idea that, the California commies are going to come here and they're going to vote, for the same things that they just fled. Oh, come on. I mean, really?
It's interesting that you mentioned that because we have actually in practice, and I'm not saying that it's that between California and Arizona it's necessarily an issue, but being here in New England most of my life, the issue of people from Massachusetts moving up into New Hampshire has been a point of contention for a lot of years. And I do have to say that, since that influx has taken place, it's really kind of boomed over the last maybe 30 to 40 years, since probably like the 70s, certainly since the 80s. New Hampshire is not this, kind of small government, low tax bastion that it was, that it was able to tout itself as. If we go back to say, the early 80s or back in the 1970s or something, it really has been a case where a lot of people, come from Massachusetts, which is, very heavily Democrat, very leftist in its political landscape, and they've come to New Hampshire. And you go to New Hampshire 30, 40 years ago back in time, you might be able to get elected dog catcher if you were a Democrat. It was almost unilaterally Republican. And I'm not sitting here obviously on an anarchist show defending Republicans or anything. But it has shifted, to the point where it's now just about a 50-50 divide. And in the time that this has happened, and as the population has increased, which is another thing entirely, I mean, that's kind of sociological rather than political, or it can be both, but I think it's predominantly a sociological thing when we talk about, individual freedom amongst masses and masses of people versus places that are very sparsely populated. What has happened is indeed, there are more taxes, there is more government, its government has gotten bigger as a result of it, because even though people have moved from Massachusetts looking for a more rural environment and fewer laws and fewer taxes, enough people that came from that kind of a situation, there are elements of New Hampshire that they like versus staying in Massachusetts, but they've still over time, wanted more, a little bit more government service, a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that. And I think what that speaks to is just that the average person who is not initiated into the kinds of philosophical ideas that are talked about on this program and so on and such, the average person seems to have this self-contradictory idea that, look, I want freedom and I want government to leave me alone, but at the same time, I want government to do 1,000,001 things. But I want it to do those 1,000,001 things while it leaves me alone at the same time. And you just can't have that. And I don't think that the average person's thinking, quite frankly, goes that far. Unfortunately, when it comes down to the nuts and bolts and the brass tacks of just day-to-day life, they figure, well, if I give up a little bit here, I'm going to get this. And it just ultimately, when you do the math, it doesn't come out in the wash. You just have bigger government and more taxes and less freedom. And people in general just haven't figured that out. So again, I don't want to speak to the California-Arizona issue because I'm not out there. I've never been there in my life. I don't live there. But I can certainly say that there is a substantial body of evidence to suggest that, Massachusetts people moving into New Hampshire, it has changed things. And, in most ways, I would say not for the better. That's just my 2 cents.
So is it so it seems to be that maybe the numbers better than I would here, where there was a combination of so many people leaving Massachusetts and going to New Hampshire where the population was dramatically less and that the population density is far lower than Massachusetts.
Yeah, it still is to this day, and it's been a gradual process. I mean, again, it's been something that's taken place over the last maybe like 40 years or so. It hasn't just been a boom in the last, say, like 5 years or something. Nothing like that.
Oh, well, I guess I would throw into the mix there not knowing, so as to try to make a decision, or draw a conclusion with a little more data. In that, maybe it was already a trend that was starting, and people in Massachusetts saw the opportunity to, instead of saying, well, the idea that couldn't be that, well, if we get enough of us here, we can make it like Massachusetts, but cheaper. So if you're being attacked by a bureaucrat, if you want to learn how to employ the Socratic method to effectively defend yourself, to keep the burden of proof on the predators making the accusations, go to markstevens.net. Got a full model on how to deal with these people in government indicted. Available also as an ebook, so check it out. And whether you get the book or not, definitely listen to the show, and feel free to call in if you are under attack so that we can help give you the tools necessary and help you through the process of getting at least minimizing the amount of damage that these predators want to do to you. So I want to welcome back for the second of 3 hours of Anarchy Radio, friend Alex Knight III. Anarchy being, right, Alex, it is an absence of rulers. No ruling class.
That is correct. It doesn't mean chaos. It's not synonymous with chaos. It simply means no rulers.
Right. So what we were talking about before, because I had made I had talked about Arizona and the migration from California, which has not had, from what I can tell, a huge impact on the amount of regulation and laws and taxes in Arizona. You've countered with an example where Massachusetts, enough people have been steadily leaving Massachusetts and moving to places like New Hampshire, and have apparently had an impact on the size and scope of the government there.
That's correct. Now, one thing that comes to mind now that we've come back, from the break as well, is the fact that we could be looking at a little bit of a different, situation in terms of demographics between the two situations. When you talk about California and Arizona versus Massachusetts immigration, fluctuating into New Hampshire, all of New England, I mean, as people generally know, on a general scale, is very, very heavily Democrat oriented. And for the longest time, New Hampshire was sort of this Republican bastion, sort of encamped in the middle of New England. Before that, if you want to go back to like the 50s, and before that, it was actually Vermont, believe it or not. Vermont was at one time even more Republican and more conservative than New Hampshire back in, I guess, what we would consider at this point to be antiquity. But in any kind of a modern context, New Hampshire is just sort of this island surrounded by places that are, either kind of like a 50-50 mix or very heavily Democrat. And so over time, that, influx, that influence has had an effect. And you may not have that same kind of situation there in Arizona, where you've got much greater geographic spaces, and you're also bordered by, places like Nevada and Utah and New Mexico, and places that are not, these sort of enclaves of, masses of Democrats or people with more leftist political leanings. So you might not be experiencing that same thing because there's still enough of a population coming from other places and from other ideological leanings to kind of more effectively counter anything that's being, brought in from California. And also probably, the fact that, people that are coming in might be, there's a possibility they might be coming in with a little bit more ideological consistency than people that move from Massachusetts to New Hampshire, who I think, kind of are just people, they're not really thinking with any kind of cohesive ideological leanings. They're just saying, hey, there's a little bit more freedom up there in New Hampshire and it's more rural. Let's go. Let's get out of the city. Let's get out of Boston. Let's get out of Worcester. Let's go up there. There's more jobs and things like that. and it's better than going way out west into the Berkshires or something like that. Let's do it. And they don't really give a hoot so much about, what the political future or destiny is going to be. But then you get a certain percentage of people, they become activists. And like you said, I think earlier before the break, we can make it kind of just like Massachusetts. It'll just be more rural, and it'll still be close to the, to the seashore rather than going way out west into the, like I said, into the Berkshires and out near the Quabbin Reservoir and places like that. So that could be what's happening.
I don't see, yes, there may be of course, a continual moving from Massachusetts into places like New Hampshire, but I don't see it as a concerted effort like the Free State Project where, that came to my mind when you were just saying that last part. But even if we accept that, all right, well, I'll ask you this. And if there's anybody in New Hampshire that has a voice, they can always call 218-632-9399. The passcode is 2020 and the pound sign. Even though Massachusetts for 40 years has had as people have left and taken their libtard philosophy, I'm just using that I'm more of a joke against the Republitards. After 40 years of this, of continued moving with their ideology, has New Hampshire collapsed as a society?
Well, no. I mean, obviously not. No, it has not. I mean, no. There has been nothing apocalyptic that has happened. No.
No. So
no, I mean, certainly not.
So, would an anarchist would it be consistent for an anarchist to say that? Who's living in New Hampshire, let's say, saying this continued migration of these leftists from Massachusetts, from New York, and New Jersey, their ideology is so dangerous to freedom, we have to vote for Republicans because they're the only ones who win. Libertarians won't win a damn thing. We have to actually vote for a candidate who will vote against leftist ideology.
Well, I think that's so fraught with self-contradictions as to be disregarded out of hand. No, I mean, that's obviously not an anarchist philosophy. That might be a Republican philosophy. I'm sure it is, but it certainly is not an anarchist one, no.
But we come full circle. The whole point of me asking that was because that is the same principle on which people are calling for stronger borders and border control. Is a leftist ideology is so dangerous. We have to use the guns of government because it will cause less harm in the long run than leftist ideology left unchecked.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But again, I stick to my earlier point that even if you are paranoid about that, and I think that you illustrate exactly why the paranoia is self-contradictory and self-defeating. Even if you are scared of that, I think you're not looking at the process, the timeline over which a state collapses. And I think all of your fears regarding welfare states and so-called libtards getting into power and things, that goes away before the borders do, because the border is literally just about the last thing that goes away. In that kind of a situation where the state is devolving and going away and freedom is coming in. So I don't see borders going away first where there's still a welfare state. I see it happening almost inevitably in the direct opposite order.
Right. And a lot of these, you got some background noise there. I think a lot of the bordertarians, they put in terms of, as long as there's a welfare state, we have to have the government using its force to keep people from coming in and being a drain on the local resources and draining the welfare state.
That's precisely their argument, yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, again, it's almost the same argument that people have for statism, that it's a necessary evil. Look, we don't like it. It's against our principles, but as far as the lesser harm, leftist ideology is a lot more harmful than statist, government, guns. Again, we're still going back to that same thing. Leftist ideology is more dangerous than the guns of government in general, which Wow. Well, we're up against a break. It's a hell of a point to have to take a break. Damn it! we'll be back. Alex Knight III and I will be back in just a moment. Don't go away. The lesser of the two evils is really what we're getting at. I guess it's the heart of the argument when people talk about borders that are pro-border. That again, and welcome back, Alex Knight III. Welcome back, my friend. That in a nutshell really is it. That leftist ideology is so astronomically dangerous that its danger exceeds even the government we have now, I guess because they feel that eventually the government that is in place right now could be 100 times or 1,000 times more violent if leftist ideology is allowed to take hold. Because that's, of course, what happened in California. That's, of course, what happened in Massachusetts. That as bad as those places are, they're just totalitarian regimes that are hell-bent on taking everyone's property, right?
Yeah, I mean that seems to be the mentality, and while I would certainly say that if you're going to have government, that the less left leaning it is, certainly at least from an economic standpoint anyway, the more preferable. But again, you have to make a decision as to whether you're a right wing conservative or whether you're an anarchist. And if you're an anarchist, you don't advocate for using the guns of government because of the possibility of there being a different kind of government than the one that exists now. You want to see it, abolished and eradicated at all levels. And so if you're going to be consistent about that, it's time to rethink your position and choose one.
Yeah, because it just seems that there's no end of statist kind of, and I know the anarchists who are bordertarians will say that they are statist. I get it. The thing is, if you're using the same arguments as a statist, because a statist will argue we have to use the guns of government to get the guns out of the hands of those that will blow up schools and whatnot. We have to limit the amount of guns that are in society so that people can safely go down the street. They can go to, see country swing band. They can watch music groups and we need to do. It's the same argument. We have to use the guns of government because we have to stop school shootings. So we have to use the guns of government because we have to stop leftist ideology from migrating into our society.
Yeah, that's a great parallel. I never thought of it in those terms, but that's exactly correct. Because if you're advocating for gun control, what you're really advocating for is the centralization of guns in the hands of government employees. You're not really against guns. You're just against them being in the hands of people who don't work for government. And so similarly, on the other side of the coin, if you're for borders to keep left-wing people out of society, that doesn't mean that you're in favor of freedom. You're simply in favor of only using government in limited areas. And so it's very paradoxical and very self-contradictory.
Yeah, it's no different than the standard left-right paradigm where Republicans claim that they're for small government, yet want a massive military and prison system. Okay, and then the libtards they say that they want limited government as far as the bedroom and music and free speech, but they want big government for welfare programs. And both sides are throwing stones at each other, and they're making exactly the same form of argument. And it's the same thing here. I think that when you have somebody who's for borders, and when you're making the argument, we have to use the guns of government. I don't want to, but we have to, because your ideology is so dangerous. And I love how you can actually paint people. And now, hey, look, someone who's an actual communist who's advocating the violent overthrow of society, okay, so that you can violently overthrow the means of production. That is you're advocating violence against people. It's so yes, that's not someone I want living down the street from me. However, how many actual communists are how do you know how many, the percentage of people that are actual refugees that are coming in from the Middle East? How do you know that they're actually communists that want or Marxists that actually advocate the violent overthrow of the means of production? How many? I mean, is that really that high a majority? You know, how do you even know that?
Well, that's very true, and I don't think that it's so much a question of people being suspected of being communists and things. I think that might be a little bit of an anachronistic assessment. You know, socialism is probably, I mean, we can get into the whole argument of, you know, the goal of socialism is, the goal of communism is socialism, you know, that like what Vladimir Lenin said. I mean, fine, but I think, you know, there is a fear of, you know, there's certainly a fear of socialism, you know, coming out of these people. And I think they also look at, you know, what's happening in Europe with the refugee crisis, and they see, you know, crime rates skyrocketing over there. And they see, you know, these kind of small isolated acts of terrorism, you know, these stabbings and people being run over with trucks and things like that. And they say, you know, we don't want that here. And that's what we're going to have here unless we seal off the border with Mexico. And if we don't do that, you know, that's what we're going to be looking at. And, you know, it's you're right. I mean, it's jumping to a huge conclusion.
I mentioned communism and Marxism for a specific reason, and that is to be very precise in the kind of ideology we're talking about. Socialism is not always communism or Marxism, and socialism doesn't, as an ideology, doesn't advocate necessarily violence. Communism and Marxism does. So that's why I use those two examples and didn't just use socialism in general. The thing is, every Western society forces children from the time they're 5 years old to 16 or so into their schools. That's socialism. They're socializing the cost of schooling. People are already getting indoctrinated into socialism practically every day of their lives. When we're told that you have Marauds, right? Isn't that a great example, Marauds?
Yeah.
So that's why, again, it's not. I don't see necessarily a danger if someone has beliefs in socialism. It's communism and Marxism, or with the alt-right when you're talking about fascism. Those are dangerous ideologies if taken to, you know, if they're put into practice. Is socialism necessarily dangerous if put into practice? No, because it doesn't have to involve any violence at all, which is why so many anarchists are socialists, because they seek the same thing, and that is to not have a ruling class. And socialism is a way of getting there, you know, without violence. Marxism and communism is explicitly violent. Yeah, you raised an issue there, and because we have to be able to separate the two things, and it can't just fall under the same argument. I don't think so anyway, because I think the argument that leftist ideology is so effing dangerous that we have to use means that are contrary to our own principles in order to stop it. Because the other thing is that is a legitimate issue, is the crime. However, there are conflicting reports regarding increases in crime. I know that they like to say out here in the United States that, you know, about the Muslim terrorists there, you know, them Middle Easterns. Again, I'm poking more fun at the Republicans who talk like that. But it's actually shown that white Christian men are more responsible for terrorist activity and mass shootings than non-white men. So, and let's not forget, the single greatest danger to women is men. But I don't want to get into that. But that's another thing. It's if there is a legitimate crime issue, yeah, that might be something to deal with. But that then goes, you know, I think hand in glove, of course, with the type of society that we have that focuses more on extracting money from society, you know, through its prison system, than actually doing things to prevent crime in the first place.
Well, that's absolutely true. Yeah, there's much more of a focus on enforcement and punishment rather than prevention. Absolutely true.
Yeah, when you look at the fact that there's 2 million some odd people in prison in the United States, which is higher per capita than China. China!
It's higher not just per capita, it's higher in numbers overall anyway.
Are you sure? Well, I know it's higher per capita, but if it's more just by, if China has less people in their prisons, than the United States, that is sick. They have, what, 3 times or more the population?
Oh yeah, no, and I believe that is true, but you do have to take into account that the Chinese are a lot more free-handed when it comes to executions too. So that does have to be taken into consideration to some extent.
Oh, so they have a policy in place to take care of the excess population. Yeah, the excess population. I got. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
the surplus
that they use afterward.
Yeah, the surplus population. That was the quote from the movie. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I screwed that one. Well, that the moment is gone. So the issue being with crime, because I know for just from here, the cops overwhelmingly spend more time on raising revenue, extracting value from the community than they do on actual preventing crimes or doing anything to prevent crimes or even to solve them.
Oh, sure. I mean that should be self-evident because at the end of the day, the people in government, they want to bring in and control as much of the flow of the money supply as possible. They're not really too interested in who kills who, as long as they're not a target. But if you or I, get slaughtered in our own houses by some, crazy person or something, they don't care about that. That's not really a concern of theirs.
No, all they care about is being complied with and getting as much money as they possibly can. That's it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's the be all end all with these people, and so crime is a legitimate issue, but it's more of this. You want a government fix for a government-imposed problem. And I think any issue with the border is still, you're looking for a government solution to a government-created problem.
Absolutely. No, that sums it up perfectly.
Because why are people leaving? We'll use Syria as an example. Why have tens of thousands of people routinely gotten the hell out of Syria?
Oh, because it's war-torn, and that comes as a result of massive government involvement in Syria.
Yeah, you've got Russia, you got the United States. You've got massive government intrusion, and that's why they're leaving. It's a government-created problem. So, but I just don't see look, I look at it as a situation kind of like this. Maybe this is the way the guys, the bordertarian kinds of anarchists are looking at it. I look at where a true ethical dilemma is in an abortion where the mother's life is in danger. And you can't deliver the baby and have it live. It's not at a time when you can do that. Someone is going to die. There is no so one is less ethical than the other. So that's a decision that's made. There are no winners, or they're all losers with that decision. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that's the way they're looking at it. Like it's we're throwing our hands up and we have no other recourse. We have to support stronger borders. We have to, because the leftists are going to kill us. Maybe they look at it. It's just there's no easy solution to this. There's no anarchist solution in the near future. We have to take this position. We have to compromise our principles, because just like with an abortion, is it the mother's life or the baby's life? We've got to go with one we think is the more ethical way to do it, and that is the leftists are far too dangerous than the government is now.
Yeah, I think you summed it up, perfectly. I think that's a great analogy. I do want to quickly repair back to something you said before the break, where you were talking about the difference between socialism not necessarily being a violent philosophy and Marxism, communism certainly being violent philosophies. I would say that, we have to distinguish a voluntary socialism versus one that is imposed upon people. And most forms of socialism are imposed by government force, on people who would prefer not to live under socialism. I personally am of the opinion that I don't think a socialist society can exist on anything more than a very small scale voluntarily before it falls apart. I certainly support the idea of anybody that wants to experiment with it and not include or encompass anybody else that doesn't wish to be a part of it. I wish them all the luck in the world because if they're doing that, they're not hurting anybody. But I used to laugh at the idea of the term libertarian socialist until I came across a couple of people who I actually believed who said, I believe in socialism, but I also don't believe that if you disagree with me that you should have to be subjected to my ideas. And I have nothing but respect for that. But out of all the socialists that I've encountered, and I've encountered a lot of them, I've run across maybe one or two people who had that kind of enlightened opinion about it. And the rest of them were just like, well, too bad. We're all in this together, and I think it's a good idea, and the sooner that you're living under it, the better. And that kind of an arrogant mentality, I would say that is dangerous. Now, can you, again, as you've talked about earlier in the program today, can you automatically say that a person coming across the Mexican border or a person flying into an airport from the Middle East has that kind of a mentality? How do you know that? I mean, you raised that question. It's a good question because I don't think there's an answer for it. You don't know that. But again, I think it's, if something is voluntary and people are free to leave and they're free to not be subjected to a system that they either no longer want to be a part of or they don't want to be a part of it in the first place, that's fine. But the minute that you take the guns of government and start pointing them at people and say you're going to live under socialism whether you want to or not, that is violent, and that's not something that I want to condone or support.
Well, I agree. We're on and that's the principle we're trying to be consistent with here, and that is to do no harm, is to not use aggression, and that only defensive force is morally justified. This is just one of those things, and it doesn't seem to help. Where, at least in what I've seen, it doesn't really help much. I guess maybe there's a backfire effect, that happens because you can have a debate, even a mild-mannered intellectual discussion between someone who's for borders and one who's not, and it just seems people are just divided on this. It's like it's the same kind of split, it seems, between people who supported Hillary and those who supported Trump. And there's like no talking to them about trying to change their mind whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And as we alluded to at the very beginning of the show, this is not the only issue that's like that amongst even people, who consider themselves voluntarists. So, there are numerous points of contention like this.
It's really unfortunate. I mean, but look, at least if you could have a rational discussion on it instead of just hurling insults and libtard this and Republic do, whatever they're saying about Republicans, it's the hurling of the insults and just getting down to the principle. And maybe somebody can just admit, because I haven't seen it, that doesn't mean they haven't, just come out and say our position on the borders literally is the lesser of the two evils. Just say it. It's just, you have to then look at all the other, and ask them, well, why are you willing to go for the lesser of the two evils here instead of taking a different principled stand, as opposed to, or attacking people, not attacking, but criticizing people who vote, who are doing so under the same principles.
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true, because the two stances are absolutely analogous to one another. Look, and I gotta admit, I've come back. I used to be completely don't vote, period, end of discussion. Do something productive that day, or don't. Just watch SpongeBob. You have a better impact. You have a bigger impact on society by watching cartoons than you do when you go and you vote, at least in national elections. But I've softened my position in that I think that if at the local level where there isn't quite as much money and control, then you might be able to get in and do something. Now,
with that said, I'm not saying that anybody who with the Free State Project has gotten in, they had an opportunity to help and they didn't. So that's why I kind of throw up in my mouth a little bit every time I hear that commercial. Like, that's amazing. I mean, people here are actually doing something. When I hear that commercial for the Free State Project, at least the people who claim to be Free Staters that got voted into office, I don't see that they're doing anything to advance the cause. But yes, there are still good people, members of the Free State Project that are doing, I'll say are doing good and moving towards that goal. But this is just one of those issues that maybe I can have someone on the show. I haven't even asked you. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that you're not a border type guy.
No, not at all. I mean, it's as we've illustrated, I think it's a pretty inconsistent position to take. But again, I'm coming at it from my own perspective in that, even if somebody is really worried about, an influx of leftist, migrants or something, again, the border is going to be there a lot longer than the welfare state is going to be, if in fact we're going to dissolve and get rid of the state to begin with anyway, because the border being one of the fundamental defining characteristics of any state or nation state, it's going to be literally probably about the last thing to go away.
Yeah, I keep getting back to what I think is, because people want to know, well, how are we going to function? How is society going to function? How are we going to get to a voluntary society, and how is society going to function once we're there? And I keep going back to where I think some kind of mutualism or Georgism is going to be kind of a transitional. It'll be something to transition. And I actually don't look at things like Rothbard did. I don't think that it is necessary, and I don't think it's a violation of the non-aggression principle or do no harm to have property held in common. That I do see that there will be a small combination of that once we get to the transitional stage or, eventually to a voluntary society. I mean, honestly, do we really want people mining in the Grand Canyon? Now, you could say, it's not your effing property. You have nothing to say about it. And the thing is, when you look at certain things, there is an effect. It's like someone saying, I can smoke as much as I want and you have nothing to say about it. But secondhand smoke is dangerous. You are affecting me. So there are things that businesses or individuals can do that do affect us. And so the classic one is, does someone get to just dump the waste from their business into the water supply just because they own that part or the claim to own that part of the river? I mean, do they get to destroy people's lives just because they claim to own the property? I mean, do we have an interest in a clean water supply? I mean, I'm not saying we have a human right, but don't we have a collective interest in having, certain things like water?
Well, in that particular instance, I think it's easily resolvable because of the fact that the water itself is not static. If it's a river or a stream, the water is constantly moving. So whatever portion of it you might, lay a claim to, you have to understand that there's a water current. The actual water itself is constantly moving. So there's no particular, I guess you could say, molecularly definitive, part of that water that at any one time is absolutely yours. It's constantly in flux. And so something that's going to affect somebody downstream, you can't just say, well, that's my water that's moving past your property down there a few miles. And if I want to dump chemicals into it, I damn well can. That doesn't make any sense. If you're going to dump chemicals in something that's contained on your own property and is not going to spread to other people's property like a moving body of water, then that's one thing. But to suggest that, well, I live next to this river, so anything I put in the river, it's on my property. It doesn't work that way because that's not the physical nature of what you're dealing with.
But that's the way businesses do things now. That's the way, mining companies and what I know, and there's huge government involvement with that also. But here, a company can come in onto other people's land, mine or frack, and do incredible damage to the water supply, and just walk away from it. You can have someone who claims, like with a dairy farm or a pig farm, and I'm talking about where the runoff goes into a lake and affects the lake, and which could get into the drinking water or the water supply. What is there? Is it really a world where, or do we want to extend property rights to a point where we say that no one has an interest but me as to what happens on this, on this property? It doesn't matter what the effects are down the road. I can dump whatever the hell I want here because it's my effing property. And if you don't like it, that's, then go to hell. Do we really want? Is it really within the principle of do no harm to say that we don't have some kind of collective right or a collective justification or need to have certain things like clean water and clean air? I mean,
well, that's yeah. I mean, I see what you're getting at, but I would simply couch it in different terms. I think that when there is a possibility of pollutants or contaminants leaching over or traveling over into someone else's property, we're no longer talking about something that's just happening on your property. We're automatically talking about something. If something is part of a natural ecosystem, it of necessity travels across other people's property. I mean, air doesn't the air I'm breathing right now doesn't stay on my property.
Right, we are up against a break, so just hold on one second. We'll get back to that in just a moment. We're up against the top of the hour break. We'll be back here on the No State Project in just a moment. Don't go away. So what we're talking about, and this is getting, we were talking about the ecosystem. You mentioned the ecosystem. And I think that's where it comes into, and some people may howl and scream, I'm a collectivist, but if we all have an interest in fresh water and having clean water or whatnot, and we all have that interest in clean air, it's a collective interest. It's not the same thing as collectivism. I'm not saying that things should be enforced at the barrel of a gun and socialized or, but we do have common interests. And, because if you take the Rothbardian or the hardcore anarcho-capitalist view of things, you can do whatever the hell you want on your property. It's your property. You got there first. You called it. And it's yours. So if you want to have something that's going to seep into the ground or into the air, hey, F everybody else. It's my property. And there's, so that I'm not saying that they all believe that, but that a lot of, it is a small faction of anarcho-capitalists or libertarians. Say, hey, my property, bitch. You have no say in what I can do with my own property. It doesn't matter what the effect is on the ecosystem. My property, my rules. F you.
Well, the thing is that I think that's a gross misconception of what private property really is. I mean, once you start doing something that interferes either with somebody else's property directly or with a natural part of the Earth's natural ecosystems that will ultimately leach over into or bleed over into or drift over into or affect somebody else's property, you're no longer on your property. You can no longer make that claim that you're on your property. So I don't think that there's anything really inconsistent with the Rothbardian view, so long as it acknowledges the fact that when you're dealing with the natural processes of the earth, even if at the moment that you conduct an action, it might still be contained to your property, ultimately, even if it's a process that takes years, something can affect somebody else's property. And as soon as it crosses that line, you're not just talking about your own property, and you are responsible and you are liable to other people.
Yeah, and the issue with the voluntary society is how do we hold someone liable for that? I mean, what do you do in a situation where, what would we do in a voluntary society when you have something like what happened in 2010, or 2010 or 2011, when you have something like the BP spill in the Gulf, which did quite a bit of damage to the area and the ecosystem. How do you hold those people accountable?
Well, I mean, the one of the first things I would say is, get government out of the way. Government has been protecting them, and actually, there was just an article in the news recently where Trump has actually repealed or removed some of the safety regulations that were put into place after that accident occurred. Now, again, they're government regulations, so it's government doing away with government. But I think even in a free society, there would be some private regulations that would be in place in order to insulate, in order to prevent, not insulate, but I use the wrong word, but to prevent the kinds of catastrophes like what we saw happen in that instance. And the reason why, I think it was BP was not, held to account as much as they would be in a free society was, again, government. Government, basically insulated them against the full brunt and the way the laws are structured with respect to corporations, which really a corporation is kind of a creature of the state to begin with anyway. But then you have this oil going into public waters, washing up on public beaches, and things that nobody really has a claim to except government. So how difficult is it for government to give them a free pass and not make them have to, engage in cleanup and pay, damages for ecological damage that was suffered, the lowering of the values of property for years and years afterward until such a catastrophe is cleaned up. Companies like BP and other ones like them would be held liable in a much more cohesive and much broader sense than they are now in the current society, which is just strangled and choked by government that both enables them to do these things and then protects them when an accident does happen because of all the profits and all the money that's just going into government coffers as a result of the way that they do business.
There's a lot of problems going, obviously, because as a corporation, which I don't think corporations would exist in a voluntary society anyway. I don't
think so either.
You couldn't have a company as big as BP. But the reason why the corporation is such a bad idea is if only because it strips personal responsibility away from the actors.
Absolutely.
That is horrendous.
Yes, it is.
So that's why they could just walk away.
Yeah. Because the entity is that's responsible is the corporation, not the actual people running the corporation. That's outrageous.
Yeah, if that was the only thing wrong, that is enough to never allow. And I guess in a voluntary society, we could, if enough people saw the evil of the corporation, they could just boycott, not do business with anyone trying to do business in that way. Oh, you don't want responsibility for your actions? I'm not going to, well, hey, you can't force me to buy your products. But so that's one way to help keep them in, sort of in line, because they can't get that damn big, but there's still going to be problems that need to be addressed and need to be fixed. You're going to have people just going to walk away. The business world, just like government, you have just probably a similar percentage of psychopaths at an upper and higher management in business than you do in government.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're kind of birds of a feather at this point, at this stage of the game in history.
Yeah. So we're still going to have these people who think that who see people as commodities and stepping stones. They don't give a damn about people like Jamie Dimon.
I'm not familiar with the name, but.
Goldman Sachs.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
And then you got Lloyd Blankfein, who think he's doing God's work by destroying the economy. You've got these people who, just like any politician, are ruthless. I know people like this. Everybody is every single thing is a commodity to slap a slogan on or a trademark or a copyright and to sell it at the highest damn possible rate. That's the way a lot of people, and they gravitate towards certain businesses, and they gravitate towards, being on top of a hierarchy, which a corporation is a hierarchy, which
Sure.
anarchists, fundamentally oppose hierarchies. I know, the ANCAPs are, if there's any left, are saying, it's a voluntary hierarchy. It's a hierarchy, nonetheless, that causes them to be able to do things to other people and see them as stepping stones, and not all of them, and to be able to just cause untold damage to communities and to families and just walk away and claim they're doing God's work. Oh, I have my kitty cat. I have a cat. Welcome back, Alex. I have a cat that is 20 pounds. It's actually my daughter's cat. He's a big Siamese, and he's loud, as you may have heard, and he can open doors. We have those. We don't have round doorknobs. We have those handles, the flat, and so
yeah.
He just gets up there, knocks a thing down as he's leaning up against the door, and he just makes his way in. So we got John, who's going to be in the Garfield County Court. Oh, it's in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Okay. What we need to do is have you post this in the No State Project chat so that if we've got somebody in the Glenwood Springs area, they might be able to show up and support you as a media rep. And also maybe maybe they'll allow it where they can confer with you and help you out throughout the ordeal. So the No State Project Skype chat is linked on my website under upcoming events. Takes you right there. So definitely take advantage and do that. And I will be spending more time in there, and maybe in the last segment I can talk about that. I'm glad to have you on, also because we're talking about these things, because I've been criticized that I don't talk enough about how a voluntary society will function or how we get there. And something we used to talk about all the time, but court stuff just kind of took the precedent,
Right. No, this show has shifted, in focus like that over the years, and with your books that you published and stuff. I can remember listening to you on shortwave radio. I think probably back about this is back probably about 10 years ago or so now. So things have changed. Things have changed dramatically, and I kind of like the direction it's gone in, because it's a combination of voluntarist theory and philosophy coupled with hands-on, taking this stuff right down to the nitty-gritty into the courts and stopping and thwarting these people and stopping this scam operation that they're running called government.
Yeah, I see that, one of the things, because look, it's a many-pronged approach on how we get to a voluntary society, and giving people the tools to defend themselves and in the process, to be able to affect other people that can see this, that they can see for themselves. This is not a matter of theory for us. We are actually going out and exposing them for the criminals that they are. That I ask simple questions. If I did things like you, like your organization, and I forced perfect strangers to give me money, would you consider me a criminal? And they say, well, yeah, of course. Well, don't you? You've already answered the question, but because it's in my question. If I did things like you, the government, but then it's just a matter of, well, if I'm a criminal for doing exactly what you're doing, how come you're not a criminal, or are you a criminal? And so it's easy for people to understand, and then to also see that you can defend yourself. And it doesn't require paying tens of thousands of dollars to a lawyer or having to spend, 6 months, a year preparing. We've had people just spend I'm not suggesting this, I'm just saying some people have just taken the book or a couple of hours of role-playing and have gone in and just annihilated the prosecution's claim. But people need to see that. People would almost always want to talk to me after I spoke to a city council, which I'd like to be able to do again. It's kind of tough for me, but I encourage other people to do that, because other people are going to see that. And see, the more people that know and see them for the criminals that they are, because they saw them, and they saw somebody like Colby Granville say, we have jurisdiction because we said so. When they see it with their own eyes, then they're more open to, hey, tell me more about what the hell is agorism?
Right. They see that the emperor has no clothes.
Exactly. And so they're more open to that. Well, what can I do? So that's why in my own small scope of influence, I don't have the largest podcast in the world, but we do have solid evidence to show that we have an impact because so more people are challenging these tickets, and we've had success, documented success, on 3 continents, and because of EYAL of No State Project Israel, we have success in Israel.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that earlier, actually, that you have that gentleman in Israel that's promoting No State Project. So that's exciting. I mean, that's because I think it's mostly been in the predominantly sort of like the so-called U.S. and then in sort of the old British Dominion countries like Canada and the UK and Australia and New Zealand, but now you're blazing inroads into Israel, so that's great.
Yeah, that's cool. So it's being able to show people that not only have people in the United States replicated what I've done, but people have gotten the book and replicated it in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and parts of Europe. Because we actually had a tax. I don't have documentation for this. He never sent it to me, but we had a tax assessment dropped in Germany. Now, I don't know how many 10,000 marks actually comes out to. I don't know if it's a lot of money or not. But I do remember that. But they never got back to me with any proof. However, we do have documented proof for other parts of Europe. Like we had 2 tickets thrown out in Wales.
Huh.
So, and we had a non-government attack that somebody defended against in Ireland. So, everything go brah, of course. So, but there's so many other things I wanted to talk about, but we're running low on time. So, in fact, we are out of time for this particular segment. What I wanted to discuss with you was net neutrality, but we're completely out of time. Could you just let people know where they can get your books?
Sure. You can go to Amazon. That's amazon.com/author/Alex R. Knight with a K, and then 3-letter I's. It's a Roman numeral 3. You can also look me up at Alex R. Knight III, again, Roman numeral 3, on Facebook. If
you have any questions or comments, if you like the material and want us to do more shows with guests where we're discussing the underlying principles of getting to a voluntary society and how a voluntary society will function, let me know on the comments at markstevens.net or Skype me at frankrizzo3. The award for the most patient caller of 2017 is going to have to go to Kerry, and I want to appreciate his patience and welcome him back to the show.
Hey there, Mark. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and thanks for your patience. My website was down, so I was not able to let anybody know that I was actually having, people like yourself. I wasn't able to let people know in a broad sense that I was having a guest. So thanks for the patience. You have some good news, an update for us?
Well, nothing but bad news, to be truthfully honest. I mean, the good news is I'm not incarcerated at the moment. There is a warrant for my arrest, to my acknowledgement. I filed the motion to quash, and they disallowed it. So I need to proceed somewhere from there. And one of the things too is when I received like your email, whether or not like I should send to you what I'm filing so that you could view it. Whether or not that would be preferable or not, I don't know as to how much time that you have to delegate to such things, such as. But I'll tell you what, I've got my copies of the Constitution of New Mexico, and then I could send you one, and I'm sure you probably already may even have one. But, once upon a time, Arizona was a territory of New Mexico, and whether or not any of that applies. But reading, obviously the judge is supposed to take care of their oath of office, and then obviously in Articles 2 and 3, they're supposed to uphold that, and then later on towards the back, obviously, that the judge will uphold those until another judge is appointed. But it just seems, of everything like we've filed, they never responded to we asked for discovery, and obviously they never answered and gave us any discovery, which, and obviously if the prosecution's coming after one and the prosecutor is representing the state and you can't put the state on there, I mean, they're just, if you don't have four legs on the table can't stand. But nevertheless, their corruption, and then of course, and this is in the county of Bernalillo, which obtains Albuquerque, New Mexico, and of course there's 30 or 40 of them, and they've got a revenue generating system over here, unbelievable. And I'm sure there's obviously, I'm sure it's you're the area that you reside in, their money generating systems probably perhaps even larger than this one, but nevertheless, they're just very dishonorable. I mean, they're not going to hold the right to. I mean, I need your help certainly with this next filing.
Okay, well, they are criminals, but let's focus on this for a second as far as what the judge did. A little unclear about when you said you filed a motion to quash the warrant and the judge disallowed it. Does that mean that he denied it formally?
Yes. Well, I called because I'm too chicken to go down there to get arrested. So I called the judge's clerk, and the clerk told me that he disallowed it, and that I needed to go down there and pay my penalties and do whatever. And let's keep in mind that this case that right there that we're working on comes from back in 2008, and it was just some sort of money generating scheme of theirs to come after me for something that went on a long time ago. But basically, it stemmed from years and years ago. The city of Albuquerque tarred and feathered me, and in order for me to have safety for my family, I literally had to go out and buy a second residence, and I chose to buy the second residence or my other dwelling in the county. And that provided me safety for some years, and obviously they've caught up to me. And once they caught up to me, now they're wanting, they went through everything that I had, and then obviously they came up with something from 2008 where they're thinking that I owe them revenue, which I don't believe that I do.
Well, I wouldn't say that there was evidence that you owed anything either, and I'm sure the prosecution is totally unable to provide any evidence whatsoever to show personal jurisdiction. But to get this cleaned up, now that you've got a formal denial from the judge, the only other revenue is to seek a petition for writ of prohibition into the higher court with a stay of proceedings so that you don't get arrested if you walk into the court.
Could you help me with that, Mark?
I can help. Yeah, I can. I have templates for that have to be edited appropriately, and I can help you, finalize it and make sure it's ready for filing. But keep this in mind. There's nothing I can do regarding the filing fee. So there's still going to be a filing fee. At least you're not in Minnesota. It's $550. So in some instances in Minnesota, the filing fee is going to far exceed the fine. Those bastards. So, we can work off air on that. So just for those listening, if a judge is denying a motion to quash a warrant based on lack of evidence proving jurisdiction, then you have legal grounds anyway. It doesn't mean they're going to accept it in higher court, but you have grounds for a petition for writ of prohibition because the judge is exceeding his jurisdiction, is going to proceed anyway to your detriment. I mean, obviously an arrest warrant, putting you in jail is going to damage you quite badly. And we do that with a stay of proceedings that we want the higher court, while they're making a decision on your complaint, to stay the proceedings at the lower court so that they don't arrest you, because they could the appellate court could set your petition for a hearing and they can arrest you as soon as you walk in the building. So you need a stay of proceedings that we always file whenever we go into the higher court, whether it's on a writ of prohibition because they denied a motion to quash the warrant, or We are on a petition for writ of mandamus because we filed a motion to change the judge, and the judge denied it. And we're seeking review by way of mandamus. So we always do it with a stay of proceedings because we don't want the lower court to continue escalating and possibly putting us in jail. Okay?
Well, God bless you. God bless you for having a good mind, because I'm just not trained or knowing of how to act within a foreign system such as our governments. It just, I'm just a common person trying to figure it all out.
Libertopia 2018 actually seems right around the corner now. May 3rd through the 6th. May 3rd through the 6th, 2018, Humphreys by the Bay in San Diego. I have been graciously asked again to speak. I'm looking forward to going out there. Definitely mark it down. Go to libertopia.org and sign up today. Let them know that you heard it right here on the big show. Libertopia.org and Libertopia 2018 in May 3rd through the 6th. Looking forward to being out there and seeing all you guys again. Hey, and we'll also get the show live from there. It won't be from the fortified compound. It'll be from Humphreys by the Bay, which I enjoy immensely. But in the last few minutes we got left, I want to bring Kerry back. Kerry, so what we discussed,
yes,
for those who are just listening, a writ of prohibition to review the denial of the motion to quash that there warrant. And let me guess, the prosecution did not respond to the motion to quash.
The only person that was ever in there was the judge himself. The judge, obviously, just acting as administrator, and we never heard anything from the prosecution.
So you file a motion, and this is something I want people to know. Getting a response from the prosecution is very rare, and the reason for that is judges are former prosecutors most of the time, and they have a very close working relationship, and they're not going to say or do anything unless the judge puts them on the spot to do so. You can accuse them of prosecutorial misconduct, and they won't say a word unless the judge turns to them and says, "What evidence do you have to support your claim?" That's a lot of times where, Gary, we get withdrawals, which we had a few of them recently, nolo prosequi, when the prosecution declines to prosecute. We've gotten that because, in a lot of instances, because the judge wanted a response from them. Otherwise, they stand mute. They know the judge is just going to, a lot of times, just say, denied. And you go, well, what objection? Because you believe that the prosecution has? No, end of discussion. I made my mind up. They're like 5-year-old kids. No, I made up my mind. Screw you. No, it's already been discussed. See, and it hasn't. So keep that in mind when you do file these the motion to dismiss. Even the discovery request, we typically don't get a response back from the prosecution. And I've posted some of the responses before, Kerry. They're so stupid that is another reason why I think they don't respond. They are laughably incoherent or lacking in merit.
So anyway, I will have a case, a separate case coming up on the 8th, and I did send you on the email that we'd been talking to. I sent you 2 emails regarding it. So anyway, I look forward to getting your email and seeing that I can't do something rather than do nothing, and other than just live in fear of going outside. It's hard for me to run my business and to protect myself, my personal property, myself. And one of the things, when I'm reading the Constitution of the state of New Mexico, it says, under search and seizure, that all persons, your property should be safe from all this. But obviously, without any kind of written claim from the state of New Mexico, I can't find out anything, and I don't see how they can move forward. So, God bless you, Mark. You've been very steadfast in your life, and you've come to the conclusions that you have, and I believe that I'm certainly there in life to back you, and I'm certainly looking for your support, because God bless for somebody like you to have figured out that, by asking the proper questions, that we can keep them at bay. And I look forward to running this out for the length of thing. And I'm just glad that, thank God that I own my own business and that I can do this, but it is coming at a cost to my life. And somewhere, and I've listened to you before where you want to hold the government accountable for stealing your own property. And that's what I want to do. Somehow, if we could hold them accountable for stealing my property, my time, God, I would entertain it.
Well, certainly will. I appreciate the words, and I'll discuss more as we go on every show, talking about, and I'll get those templates out about filing claims against their insurance. What you need, what I'll do is I have to let you go, but email me again what you sent, because I was out of town. My computer was I didn't have the computer for part of that, so just email me again so I have it recent and I don't have to go through everything. And I'll get your response, and I'll send you the templates for the petition for writ of prohibition and a motion to stay. Okay.
And anything too for this coming case on the 8th?
Yeah, well, we can discuss it on email.
Thank you.
I appreciate the call. It was Kerry in, I guess, New Mexico. That's where he's at. New Mexico, it's just no different, really. The bureaucracy there, it's all based on the same thing. If you're in our area, we own you. We could do whatever we want because we have immunity. And the idea that just because their constitution and laws will say something about property being held, they've always stated that the needs or the interest of the government outweighs private interest. So we're always going to lose that battle. See, that's because they have what's called the rule of necessity. And it's embedded right in their sacred writ. Necessitas non habet legem. Necessity has no law. So if they just deem it necessary, then it's okay. It's all right. It's not. It's just like when you can show that every judge has a bias and you can prove it. You can prove it. You can't disqualify them all. Because their decision is, well, the rule of necessity says that if you disqualify all, you disqualify none. Now you can't use that kind. Now that actually is legal logic because it's nonsensical. You can't use that kind of logic in other real honest professions. If all your bone marrow is cancerous, then none of it is. It's just and that's one of because there's so many ridiculous things in the legal profession and with the concept of government and theory and in practice, because there's so many contradictions, because it's so demonstrably stupid. It's so easy to make jokes and to be able to just change in the context. That's why I talked about in Adventures that stupid black robe and how everything has to be handed to the bailiff. Can you imagine him doing that out in the street? I just always pictured him doing that, going and get hot dogs. And how funny it would be if the hot dog vendor was to try to pass the hot dog directly to the judge and have him flip out and scream he'll hold him in contempt, give it to the bailiff. Because they are just a gang of criminals. They are just men and women forcing us to pay them. That's it. It's no more complicated than that. Yeah, there are services that they steal money from us to provide services. And it doesn't matter if those are services that we want. You don't need to have a prison system. No one can come up with a rational position why it's necessary to have a ruling class and to provide services with a prison system. Because whatever logic they use, whatever argument they raise, I should be and you should be able to do it the same way. If using deadly force and threats of force and a prison system, having your own prison, if that is sufficient grounds to override and negate the immorality or the unethical behavior of forcing people to give you money, Well, then guess what? Unless you're using a fallacious double standard, that should apply to me too. Everyone should be able to do that and be as moral. But it's not, because it is a double standard. It is wrong. And we ran out of time, and I want to spend, maybe on Wednesday broadcast we'll discuss more about the chat, but I will be spending more time in the chat. So hopefully if you're preparing for court and you need some help with that, get into the No State Project Skype chat. It's on the upcoming events. I will be live on Wednesday. So till then, salud.